Her hands landed on my face like the touch of a final judgment. My skin burned under those cold fingers, while the silence around us grew almost solid. "They won't understand," she whispered, her warm breath against my temple. I felt a tremor run through my body as the dagger brushed my neck, not as a threat, but as a promise. Moonlight bathed us through the broken window, a witness to what was about to happen. It no longer mattered, the blood on my clothes or the screams that still echoed in the courtyard. The decision had been made long before that night, long before I knew my fate had been sealed since the first glance. Before we delve into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. I remember the cold first, the way it seeped through the cracks in the stone walls of the servants' hall where I grew up. It was a cold that settled in the bones, as permanent as the scars on the hands of my adoptive mother, Madame Eleanor. She had found me as a baby in the forest, they said, abandoned like so many other unwanted children who ended up in that place. Children born under an eclipse, children with birthmarks, children whose eyes reflected colours that shouldn't exist. In my case, it was my eyes, too amber for an ordinary child, almost golden under certain light. Madame Eleanor always covered my face with a veil when visitors arrived. "For your own good, Lena," she would say with that husky voice that trembled at the edges. And I believed her, just as we believe in the rain before it wets our skin. The servants' hall sat on the edges of Silverwood Valley territory, far enough from Stonehold Palace that no one from there ever visited us, but close enough for stories to arrive fresh, still steaming with novelty. I grew up amidst whispers about the Lord of the Valley, the man whose mere mention made adults lower their voices. No one uttered his true name. He was simply the Lord, the one whose word was law and whose gaze, they said, could tear secrets from one's soul. Stories of his cruelty and relentless justice mingled with legends of his powers. Some swore he could speak with the mountain wolves. Others, that his blood was not red, but black as night. We, the children of the hall, were trained to serve the great families of the valley. Some would become house staff, others artisans, still others guards or messengers. It depended on our aptitude, our physique, our talents. Madame Eleanor soon noticed that I had skilled hands for sewing, a keen eye for colours and patterns. By the age of 12, I was already embroidering the most delicate cloaks, creating patterns that made even the matrons of the hall sigh in admiration. "Blessed hands," they would say, but they always kept their distance, as if fearing my touch might transmit some hidden curse. There was something about me that caused this effect on people, a subtle discomfort, as if they sensed I didn't truly belong there. Perhaps it was the way I observed everything, storing every detail, every shadow. Or perhaps it was simply because, unlike the other orphans, I never tried to fit in. There was a silent resistance in me, a refusal to bow down that Madame Eleanor tried to correct with gentle but persistent reprimands. It was in my 16th winter that the world I knew began to crumble. We were in the great communal hall, our hands busy with needles and thread, when the doors burst open violently. The cold wind from outside brought not only snowflakes, but 3 riders dressed in the silver cloaks of the Lord's personal guard. The entire room froze. Madame Eleanor rose, her spine straight as a board, her face suddenly pale. "We're looking for the seamstress," said the tallest of them, his harsh voice cutting through the silence. "The one with a gift for colours." I felt all eyes converge on me, like invisible daggers piercing my skin. Madame Eleanor stepped forward, interposing herself between me and the guards. "She's still very young," she said, and I noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in her voice. "Just an apprentice. We have more experienced seamstresses who could—" "These are direct orders," the guard interrupted. "The ceremony of lights approaches and the ritual cloak needs to be made. This time, he specifically asked for her. He. Just that, no name, no title. And everyone knew who he was." A shiver ran down my spine. Madame Eleanor seemed to age 10 years in that instant. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded slowly. "How long will she stay at the palace?" "Until the work is finished." The guard finally looked directly at me, his cold eyes assessing me. "Take only what's essential, girl. We leave before nightfall." I climbed the narrow stairs to the small room I shared with 2 other girls, feeling my legs heavy as lead. My companions followed me, their eyes wide with fear and awe. As I gathered my few belongings and work tools, they bombarded me with whispered questions. "Are you really going to the palace? They say the Lord keeps shadow creatures in the dungeons. Do you think you'll see him in person?" I didn't answer any of them. There was a lump in my throat, made not of fear but of a strange anticipation, as if some part of me knew this was the moment I had been waiting for, even without knowing I was waiting. Madame Eleanor met me at the gate. Her wrinkled hands adjusted the collar of my worn cloak, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity she had never shown before. "Lena," she said, so low I could barely hear, "there are things you don't know about yourself. Things I should have told you a long time ago." My heart pounded. "What things?" She glanced nervously at the guards who waited impatiently with the horses. "There's no time now. But remember, no matter what happens, don't let him see your eyes directly. Don't let him touch your bare skin. Do you understand?" I nodded, confused and frightened by the urgency in her voice. "And take this." She placed something in my hand, a small leather pouch tied with a silver cord. "Keep it always close to your chest. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, tucking the amulet under my clothes. Madame Eleanor then embraced me briefly but tightly, a gesture so rare it left me stunned. When we parted, I saw tears in the corners of her eyes. "May the ancient mothers protect you," she murmured, and then gently pushed me toward the riders. The journey to Stonehold Palace took less than 2 hours, but every minute seemed to stretch into hours. I rode behind the leader's horse, my hands gripping his cloak, trying not to fall as we ascended the steep path that snaked up the mountain. The wind whipped my face, but I dared not close my eyes. I wanted to absorb every detail of the path, as if my life depended on memorizing every curve, every twisted tree, every rock face. When we finally sighted the palace, the sun was beginning to set, casting a reddish glow over the white stone towers that seemed to grow directly out of the cliff. It wasn't a castle like those in stories. It was something older, more primordial, as if the mountain itself had decided to take the form of human dwelling. We entered through a side gate far from the main entrance. "Servants' entrance," the guard briefly explained when he noticed my questioning gaze. I was led through narrow corridors and service stairs, always upwards, deeper and deeper into the heart of the palace. Staff hurried past, barely sparing us a glance. Guards stationed at regular intervals watched us with impassive expressions. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of stairs and corridors, we reached a dark wooden door carved with intricate designs of foliage and forest animals. The guard knocked 3 times and a female voice answered from within. He opened the door and gently pushed me inside. "The seamstress, Madame Hera," he announced, and then withdrew, closing the door behind me. The room was wide and lit by scented candles in silver candelabras. Large arched windows overlooked the palace's inner courtyard, where torches were already being lit for the night. A middle-aged woman sat by a table covered with fabrics of all colours and textures. She looked up when I entered, green, piercing eyes, framed by expression lines that spoke of laughter and worries in equal measure. "So you're the girl with a gift for colours," she said, her voice surprisingly melodious. "Come closer, let me look at you." I advanced hesitantly, conscious of the state of my travel clothes, my hair dishevelled by the wind. The woman, Madame Hera presumably, studied me carefully, her eyes scanning my face, my posture, my hands. I tried to remember Madame Eleanor's warning and kept my eyes down, fixed on a spot just below the woman's chin. "You're afraid?" she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "You shouldn't be. Here you'll be safe, as long as you follow the rules." "What are the rules, madam?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Simple, do what you're told. Don't ask unnecessary questions. Don't wander the palace without escort. And above all," she leaned slightly forward, "never under any circumstances enter the throne room during the full moon." I nodded, absorbing every word. There was something more in her voice when she mentioned the last rule, an almost imperceptible tremor. "Good," she said, leaning back. "Now as for your work, the Lord has ordered a ceremonial cloak for the ceremony of lights. It must be completed in 3 weeks. 3 weeks! a job that would normally take months, considering the details involved in a ceremonial piece. The fabric has already been chosen. She pointed to a roll of midnight blue silk on the table, a blue so deep it seemed to absorb the candlelight around it. The stones and threads for the embroidery are in those chests. I approached the table, allowing myself to touch the fabric for the first time. It was like stroking solidified water, cool and dense under my fingers. I unrolled a small section and held it up to the light. The silk captured the luminosity and transformed it, creating shadows and depths where none should exist. "It's magnificent," I murmured, momentarily forgetting my fear. "It is worthy of him," Madame Hera replied. And again I noticed that strange note in her voice. Not exactly fear, something more complex. Respect, perhaps, or veneration. "Tomorrow you'll begin your work," she continued, standing. "For today I'll show you your quarters and where you'll take your meals. You'll have what you need. But remember, time is of the essence." I followed Madame Hera through more corridors and stairs to a small tower on the east side of the palace. My quarters consisted of a modest but comfortable room, with a real bed, a luxury I had never experienced in the servants' hall, a work table by the window that offered a view of the mountains, and a small washstand behind a screen. There was also a fireplace where a fire already crackled invitingly. "Your meals will be brought here," Madame Hera explained. "If you need any additional materials or tools for your work, just inform the staff who will attend you. Your workroom is at the end of this corridor. There you'll find better light during the day and all the necessary equipment." She walked to the door but stopped before leaving, turning to face me once more. "One last thing, girl. It's possible he'll want to see the progress of your work personally. If that happens, keep your head down and answer only what you're asked. Understood?" "Yes, madam," I replied automatically as a shiver ran down my spine. After Madame Hera left, I sat on the edge of the bed, finally alone with my tumultuous thoughts. I took out the small amulet Madame Eleanor had given me and examined it in the firelight. It was a simple pouch, but what caught my attention was the silver cord, thin and intricately braided, clearly too valuable for something belonging to a simple matron of orphans. I hesitated before opening the pouch. Part of me feared what I might find inside, but curiosity won, and carefully I untied the knot and poured the contents into my palm. It was a crystal fragment, no bigger than my thumbnail. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, just a broken piece of something larger. But when I held it up to the fire, the crystal caught the light in an impossible way, refracting it into colours I had never seen before, colours that shouldn't exist. For an instant, I felt dizzy, as if the small object was pulling me into its kaleidoscopic depths. I quickly moved it away from my eyes, suddenly frightened. With trembling hands, I put the crystal back in the pouch, retied the knot and hung it around my neck, hiding it under my clothing, close to my heart, as I had promised. That night, lying in the softest bed I had ever known, I lay awake for hours, listening to the strange sounds of the palace, the groan of the wind between the towers, the occasional metallic clinking of patrolling guards' armor, and, more distantly, almost on the border between audible and imaginary, what sounded like wolf howls in the distant mountains. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed. I dreamed of eyes blue as ice looking at me across centuries. I dreamed of strong hands holding mine, and of fire born from that touch. And I dreamed of wings, great black wings that enveloped me like a protective cloak as the world around fell apart in flames. I woke before dawn, covered in sweat despite the cold in the room, where the fireplace fire had dwindled to embers. My whole body ached, as if I had run all night, and the crystal under my clothes felt warm, almost feverish against my skin. The work began that same day. After a simple but substantial meal, I was led to the workroom, a circular chamber at the top of the tower with windows in all directions, offering perfect light for the delicate embroidery work. In the center was a large work table, and on the walls, shelves laden with threads of every imaginable color, needles of various sizes, scissors, and other instruments. The fabric was already stretched on a large hoop ready for me. Beside it, I found parchments with detailed drawings of the pattern to be embroidered. Constellations, ancient runes and symbols I had never seen before, intertwined in a design so complex it made my head spin just looking at it. Madame Hera appeared briefly to check if I had everything I needed. "The designs were made by the Lord himself," she explained, observing my expression as I studied the parchments. "No one knows the full meaning of the symbols. Our job is not to understand, merely to execute." But as she spoke, I felt something strange. The symbols in the drawings? I didn't consciously recognize them, but something within me seemed to resonate with them, like instrument strings vibrating in response to a specific note. It was disturbing and, at the same time, strangely comforting. "I understand," I replied, though I didn't really. "Good work, then. I'll come check your progress at the end of each day." And so I was left alone with the most important and most mysterious work I had ever undertaken. I spent hours just studying the designs, memorizing every curve, every intersection, trying to comprehend the logic behind the seemingly chaotic pattern. Only when the sun was high in the sky did I actually begin to embroider, with slow, deliberate movements, conscious that every stitch had to be perfect. Time took on a strange quality during those days. I worked from dawn until well after sunset, stopping only for quick meals and short rests when my eyes burned too much to continue. The cloak grew under my hands, each symbol embroidered with silver and gold threads, each constellation marked with tiny precious stones that reflected the light like true stars. And as the work progressed, something even stranger began to happen. I started dreaming of the symbols, seeing them float in the space behind my closed eyelids. In my dreams, they weren't just marks on fabric. They moved, pulsed with a life of their own, whispered in a language I could almost understand. During the day, as I embroidered, I sometimes entered an almost trance-like state, my fingers moving as if they had a will of their own, choosing threads and creating patterns that weren't in the original designs, but which seemed to belong there, as if the cloak itself was guiding me. On the 7th day, I realized something was wrong. I was adding elements that were not in the original designs. Small runes between the constellations, subtle lines connecting symbols that were originally separate. And the worst part, I couldn't stop. It was as if my hands had discovered a hidden truth in the pattern and were determined to reveal it. I tried to undo the unauthorized stitches, but each time I cut a thread, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if I was cutting something within myself. After several frustrated attempts, I gave up. The cloak would be what it needed to be, not what the drawings dictated. When Madame Hera came to check my progress that night, I tried to hide the alterations, showing only the parts that faithfully followed the original design. She seemed satisfied, praising the precision of my stitches and the way the stones caught the light. "He will be pleased," she said, stroking the fabric with reverence. "Few understand the importance of this cloak. It's not just a ceremonial garment, you know. They say it carries true power." I swallowed hard, suddenly conscious of the crystal hidden under my clothes. "What kind of power, madam?" She looked at me with surprise, as if she had forgotten I was there. "Ancient power, power of transformation. The kind of power that bends time itself." She shook her head as if dismissing an uncomfortable thought. "But these are just legends, of course. Stories to impress the gullible." When she left, I returned to the cloak with new urgency. The alterations my hands insisted on making, were they amplifying this power? Or worse, distorting it in some dangerous way? On the night of the 10th day, it happened. I was working late, my eyes burning from the effort of embroidering by candlelight, when the room door opened without warning. I didn't look up immediately, assuming it was Madame Hera, or perhaps a member of the staff bringing more candles. "Is your work so absorbing that you don't notice when someone enters?" The voice was deep, resonant, with a quality that made every word seem both a caress and a threat. I looked up then, momentarily forgetting Madame Eleanor's warning, and I saw him for the first time. He was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen, with broad shoulders covered by a simple black cloak, yet made of a fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light itself. His face was angular, sculpted as if nature had decided to create perfection and then purposefully added a single flaw, a thin scar that cut across his right eyebrow and descended to the middle of his cheek. His hair was black as ebony, long to his shoulders, partially tied back with a silver clasp. But it was his eyes that captivated me, that made me forget to breathe. Blue as the purest ice, so clear they seemed almost translucent, and infinitely, impossibly deep. He was the Lord of the Valley. There was no other possibility. I remembered the warning too late and quickly lowered my eyes, but the damage was done. For a long moment I felt his gaze studying me, heavy as a physical hand on my skin. "Look at me." It was an order, given with the quiet certainty of one who is never disobeyed. I fought, the urge to obey keeping my eyes fixed on the cloak in my lap. "My lord, forgive me," I murmured. "Madam Hera instructed me to keep my eyes down in your presence." "Madam Hera isn't here now," he replied, his voice softening slightly. "And I want to see the eyes of the person who is recreating my symbols." Those words chilled me. He knew I had altered the designs. Slowly, reluctantly, I raised my gaze. He studied me for a long moment, his face impassive. Then, to my surprise, a faint smile curved his lips. "Interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Very interesting." He advanced to the table, moving with the grace of a predator, and examined the cloak. His fingers, long, strong, with silver rings on 3 of them, traced the symbols I had added, following the lines that connected constellations that should have remained separate. "Do you understand what you're doing here?" he asked, his voice now low and intense. "No, my lord," I answered honestly. "My hands, they seem to know the way, even when my mind doesn't." He nodded, as if my answer confirmed something he already suspected. "What is your name, girl?" "Lena, my lord." "Lena," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "Diminutive of—" "I don't know, my lord. I was found in the forest as a baby. Madame Eleanor gave me that name." Something gleamed in his eyes at the mention of Madame Eleanor. Recognition, perhaps, or something more complex. "Madame Eleanor," he said, the name sounding different in his voice. "She took good care of you from what I see." "Yes, my lord." He circled the table slowly, still examining the cloak, but I felt his true interest was now me. There was something in his attention that made me feel exposed, as if he could see through my clothes, my skin, down to the secrets kept in my bones. "Continue your work," he said finally, stopping near the door. "But know this, Lena of the Forest, what you are doing here is more important than you imagine. The symbols your hands add, they complete a circle that has remained unfinished for centuries." With those enigmatic words, he left, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps and a strange scent, something wild, like forest after rain, mixed with a metallic aroma that reminded me of blood. I remained motionless for a long time after he left, my heart beating so hard I feared it could be heard throughout the palace. The crystal against my chest seemed to have gained weight, pulsating warm against my skin. The next day, Madame Hera appeared earlier than usual, her face etched with lines of worry. "He was here," she said, not as a question but as a statement. I nodded, unable to lie, and you looked him in the eye. Again, it wasn't a question. "He ordered me to," I replied defensively. She sighed, running a hand through her greying hair. "Of course he did. He always gets what he wants." She came closer, lowering her voice. "Lena, you need to be careful. The Lord, he's not like other men." "What do you mean?" "There are stories. Ancient stories." She glanced nervously at the door as if fearing he might be listening. "They say the first Lord of the Valley made a pact with the creatures of the mountains hundreds of years ago. A pact sealed with blood which granted power and longevity in exchange for something precious." "What kind of pact? With what creatures?" "No one knows for sure. Some say they were the ancients, beings who existed before men. Others speak of the Shadow Lords." She made a protective gesture with her hand. "The important thing is that this pact remains to this day, and with each generation, the Lord of the Valley must renew it during the ceremony of lights." "With the cloak I'm making," I concluded, suddenly understanding the importance of the piece. She nodded gravely. "The cloak is part of the ritual. It's what allows him to walk between the two worlds without being consumed." She hesitated, then added, "Some say the current Lord has already renewed the pact 7 times. But that would mean he lived much longer than a normal human life," she completed. her voice barely a whisper now. There are staff in the palace who swear he hasn't aged a day in the last 50 years. That's why no one pronounces his true name. Names have power, Lena, and some names are too dangerous to be spoken aloud. A chill ran down my spine. The fantastic stories I had heard in childhood about the mysterious Lord of the Valley. Were they more than mere legends? Why are you telling me this? I asked. Madame Hera's face took on a complex expression, fear, resignation, and something that looked almost like hope, because he saw something in you, something that intrigued him. And in his world, awakening interest can be both a blessing and a death sentence. She gripped my shoulders, her fingers pressing with urgency. Complete the cloak as he desires. Do your work and then leave, back to the safety of the servants' hall. Don't look back. Don't ask questions. And above all, don't let him touch you. With those words, she left me, the sound of her hurried footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. In the days that followed, I worked with renewed dedication, but also with growing unease. The symbols my hands insisted on adding to the cloak seemed increasingly familiar, as if I had known them in another life. And the dreams worsened. Now I didn't just see the symbols, I lived them. In my dreams, I walked through primeval forests, conversed with creatures of shadow and light, and felt the power of the earth flowing through me like an untamed river. Every night, I awoke breathless, the crystal pulsing against my skin like a second heart. And each morning, I looked at the cloak and saw that somehow it had advanced during the night, as if my hands had continued to work while I slept. On the 15th day, when the cloak was almost complete, he came again. This time I felt his presence even before the door opened, a pressure in the air, an electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Your work progresses well, he said, circling the spread-out cloak, which now glowed with constellations of silver and gold under the candlelight. Thank you, my lord, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The symbols you added, he traced one of them with his fingertip. Do you know what they mean? I hesitated. The truth was I didn't know, not consciously. But there was something in me that recognized, that responded to them like a plant responds to the sun. Not with words, my lord, I finally answered. But I feel as though I knew them before I even saw them. He smiled then, a smile that transformed his austere face into something almost beautiful. Of course you do, he murmured. Blood always recognizes its own song. I frowned, confused. My lord? Instead of answering, he extended his hand toward me. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. I remembered the warnings, from Madame Eleanor, from Madame Hera. Don't let him touch you. But there was an authority in his voice that made disobedience almost unthinkable. I rose and, careful not to touch his outstretched hand, indicated that I would follow him. A flash of amusement crossed his face, as if he knew exactly why I avoided his touch. He led me through corridors I had never seen before, up increasingly narrow stairs until we reached a small, simple door at what seemed to be the highest point of one of the towers. There were no guards here, no staff, only silence and the distant howl of the wind. My private chambers, he explained, opening the door. No one enters here without my invitation, not even Madame Hera. I hesitated on the threshold, entering the private chambers of the Lord of the Valley. This went far beyond what would be considered appropriate for someone of my position, but there was something in his eyes, not a threat, but an urgency, almost a plea, that made me step forward. The room was surprisingly simple, a large bed covered in furs, a table with scattered parchments, shelves full of ancient books, and a fireplace where a low fire crackled. What caught my attention, however, was the opposite wall, covered from floor to ceiling by a hand-painted mural, depicting a mountain landscape under a starry night sky, and scattered throughout the mural, as if they were a natural part of the scene, were they? The same symbols I had been embroidering on the cloak, the same ones that appeared in my dreams. This painting is over 300 years old, he said, observing my reaction. It was made by the first Lord of the Valley, the one who established the pact. Each lord since then has added to the painting, based on visions and dreams. But never, he paused, his intense eyes fixed on me. Never in all these years has anyone besides the Lords of the Valley been able to see the hidden patterns, much less reproduce them. I approached the mural, irresistibly drawn. My hand rose of its own accord, tracing in the air the symbols my fingers knew so well. "How is it possible?" I whispered. "Tell me, Lena, of the forest." His voice was softer now, almost gentle. "What do you carry close to your heart?" I froze. How did he know about the crystal? Instinctively, my hand went to my chest, feeling the small bulge of the pouch under the fabric. "It's just a protective amulet," I lied, my voice betraying my nervousness. "Madame Eleanor gave it to me before I left." "Madame Eleanor," he repeated, that same strange glint in his eyes. "You call her that, but do you know who she really is?" "She's the matron of the servants' hall," I replied automatically, but with less conviction than I intended. He shook his head slowly. "She was much more than that a long time ago, before she hid in the shadows, before she took on that simple name." He took a step toward me. "Just as you are much more than a simple seamstress, Lena. Or should I call you by your true name?" My heart pounded painfully. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The crystal you carry," he continued, relentless, "is a fragment of the heartstone of the mountain, the stone that sealed the original pact. It was stolen 16 years ago, the same night a baby disappeared from the palace." The world seemed to sway around me. "Are you saying You are Alina," he said, and the name resonated through the room as if it had a power of its own, making the fireplace flames tremble. "Daughter of Marwen, the last true Luna, and my niece." The revelation fell upon me like a lightning bolt, shaking the foundations of everything I believed about myself. I recoiled a step, then another, until I felt the cold wall against my back. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I'm just an orphan, a nobody." "You were never a nobody," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You are the heir to two powerful bloodlines. Through your mother, you carry the blood of the Lunas, women who could read the stars and bend the fabric of fate. And through your father," he hesitated, "through your father, you carry the blood of the ancients, those who made the original pact." "My father," I repeated, the words strange in my mouth. "Who was he?" A shadow crossed the Lord's face. "Your father was my younger brother Aaron. He rebelled against the pact. He believed it was possible to break the alliance without destroying the valley. He was wrong." Something in the way he said it made me shiver. "What happened to him? And to my mother?" "They died the night you disappeared," he replied, a note of genuine pain in his voice. "A storm like no other swept through the valley. Some say it was the ancients, furious at the attempt to break the pact. Others," he paused, "others say I killed them." I swallowed hard, suddenly aware that I was alone with a man who had just confessed he was suspected of my parents' murder. "Were you?" I managed to ask, my voice almost inaudible. "No," he replied, holding my gaze. "I loved my brother, despite our differences, and Marwen was like a sister to me. I was the one who found them after the storm, their bodies intertwined as if they had tried to protect each other until the end. But you had vanished from your cradle, along with the crystal." "Madame Eleanor," I murmured, the pieces beginning to fit. "She took me, hid me, to protect you," he agreed. "She was your mother's confidant, one of the few people who knew Aaron's plan. I believe she feared I would use you to renew the pact your father had tried to break." My mind reeled, trying to absorb so many revelations at once. The crystal against my chest seemed to pulse stronger, as if responding to its own story being told. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked finally. "Why bring me to the palace after all these years?" He turned to the mural, his profile silhouetted against the vibrant colours of the painting. "Because the pact is weakening. The last renewal was not complete. Something essential was missing. You, the crystal. The united blood of the two lineages." He turned back to me, his eyes intense. "This year's Ceremony of Lights is the last chance. If the pact is not renewed correctly, the entire valley will be consumed. All who live here will perish. And you want me to participate in this ritual?" I asked, a mix of fear and fascination growing within me. "To help renew a pact made with creatures I don't even know?" "I'm not asking, Alina," he said, using the name that still sounded strange to my ears. "I'm offering you your birthright, your destiny, the truth about who you really are." He took a step toward me, and this time I didn't recoil. The cloak you are creating isn't just for me, he continued. It's for you too. Together, as representatives of the two lineages, we can renew the pact in a way that hasn't been possible for generations. And perhaps, he hesitated, perhaps we can even renegotiate it, make it more just. Accomplish what your father dreamed, but in the correct way. His words ignited something within me, a spark of possibility, of purpose. But at the same time, decades of stories about the fearsome Lord of the Valley could not be forgotten so easily. How do I know I can trust you? I asked. How do I know this isn't just another way for you to wield power for yourself? A sad smile touched his lips. You don't know. You'll have to feel the truth, as you felt the symbols on the cloak. He extended his hand. Touch me, Alina. Let blood speak to blood. You'll know the truth then. I looked at that outstretched hand, remembering the urgent warnings. Don't let him touch you. But now I understood the true meaning behind those words. It wasn't fear of what he might do to me, but of what would happen when the power of two lineages met. With my heart pounding against the crystal I carried, I extended my own hand. The moment our skins touched, the world exploded in light. Visions flooded my mind, ancient mountains, creatures of shadow and fire, pacts sealed with blood. I felt the history of the valley flow into me like a wild river, showing me truths that had been hidden for centuries. I saw my father and mother, young and in love, plotting their doomed rebellion. I saw Madame Eleanor. No, Lyrael was her true name, fleeing through the storm with a baby in her arms and a stolen crystal hidden in her clothes. And I saw him, Thorn, my uncle, the Lord of the Valley, carrying the weight of the pact alone for decades, trying to protect the valley even as the curse slowly consumed his soul. When the visions ceased, I realized I had fallen to my knees, my hand still clinging to his, like an anchor in the mental storm. Tears streamed down my face, and the crystal against my chest shone so brightly that its light was visible through the fabric of my clothes. Now you know, he said softly, kneeling beside me. Now you understand. And I understood. I understood why my hands knew symbols I had never seen, why the dreams had haunted me my whole life, why I had always felt like an outsider, even among the other orphans of the servants' hall. I was Alina, daughter of Marwan and Aaron, heir to two powerful lineages, and my destiny was intertwined with the valley in a way I could never have imagined. What should I do? I whispered, looking into the eyes of the man who was my uncle, my lord, and now, somehow, my partner in a shared destiny. Finish the cloak, he replied. Complete the symbols as your blood teaches you, and on the night of the ceremony of lights, walk with me to the heart of the mountain. He held my face between his hands, his blue eyes piercing mine. Together, we will rewrite the destiny of the valley, and your own. That night, I returned to my quarters with my mind filled with new truths and the weight of a destiny I was only beginning to comprehend. The small room that had once seemed comfortable now felt like a prison, confining me when my entire being yearned to run to the mountains, to feel the power of the earth beneath my feet. I took the crystal from its pouch and held it in the moonlight streaming through the window. It was no longer a strange and frightening object, but a part of me, a fragment of the power that ran in my veins. I watched fascinated as it captured the silver light and transformed it into impossible colors that danced across the room's walls. A sudden impulse seized me. I picked up a needle from the work table and, without hesitation, pricked the tip of my finger. A drop of blood formed, red and bright. I let it fall onto the crystal. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. The crystal absorbed the blood like a thirsty sponge, and its glow intensified tenfold, now pulsing with a rhythm that echoed my heartbeat. The light emanating from it formed patterns on the walls, the same symbols I had been embroidering on the cloak, now dancing around me like living creatures. A sensation of power flowed through me, unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was as if every nerve in my body was awakening from a long sleep, as if I was finally becoming complete. In the days that followed, I worked on the cloak with a feverish intensity. I no longer needed to think about the symbols. My fingers moved with absolute confidence, guided by an ancestral knowledge I now recognized as my birthright. Sometimes, as I worked, I could feel invisible presences around me, observing, evaluating, waiting. Madame Hera noticed the change in me, of course. Her eyes followed me with a mixture of fear and resignation. One afternoon, when they came to check my progress, she stayed behind after the others left. "He told you, didn't he?" she asked in a low voice. I nodded, without interrupting my work. "And you believed him?" It wasn't a question. My hands paused for a moment. "I saw the truth when I touched him," I replied. "I felt the history of the valley flow into me." She closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing a blow. "Then it is done. The circle is complete. You knew all along," I accused softly. "You knew who I was since I arrived." "I suspected," she admitted. "Your eyes? They are your mother's eyes. And when I saw how you responded to the symbols, I was sure." She came closer, lowering her voice even further. "But listen to me, Alina, there is still a choice. You can still refuse." I frowned. "Refuse what? My own blood? My destiny?" "The pact is not what it seems," she continued, urgent. The price is always higher than they say. Your father found that out. That's why he tried to break it." "What do you mean?" A chill settled in my spine. "Ask him about the long shadow," she whispered. "Ask him what happens to the Lords of the Valley after the 7th renewal." She cast a nervous glance at the door. "I can't say more. But remember, even destiny can be defied if the will is strong enough." With those enigmatic words, she withdrew, leaving me with new doubts swirling in my mind. That night, I dreamed of my father, not as he was in the visions I had through Thorn's touch, but as he might be now if he lived. His face was like mine, but more angular, masculine, with the same amber eyes I saw in the mirror. In the dream, he didn't speak, just looked at me with a painful intensity, as if trying to convey an urgent message with just his gaze. I woke with a clear resolution. I needed more answers before the ceremony of lights, which was now just 3 days away. And there was only one person who could give me those answers. The next morning, I requested an audience with the Lord of the Valley. The request, coming from a simple seamstress, caused a stir among the staff, but to my surprise, it was granted immediately. I was escorted not to the throne room or to his private chambers, but to an inner garden I didn't know, a small oasis of green and tranquility in the stone heart of the palace. Thorn, it was still difficult to think of him by that name, stood by a fountain, feeding small blue birds that hopped confidently into his outstretched hand. The scene was so incongruous with his terrifying reputation that I stopped, momentarily disconcerted. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that transformed his austere face into something almost jovial. "Niece," he greeted, the words still strange between us. "You asked to see me?" "I have questions," I said directly, approaching him. "Of course you do." He gestured for me to sit on a nearby stone bench. "Ask away, then." I took a deep breath. "What is the long shadow?" The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a grave expression. The birds flew away as if sensing the sudden change in atmosphere. "Who told you about that?" he asked, his voice controlled but with an underlying tension. "Does it matter?" He studied me for a long moment before answering. "The long shadow is the final price," he said finally. "After 7 renewals of the pact, the Lord of the Valley can no longer remain fully human. The transformation begins, slow at first, then faster. The body changes. The mind changes. Eventually, what remains is neither human nor ancient, but something between the two worlds. A living shadow." A chill ran down my spine. "And you? This will be my 7th renewal," he confirmed, his gaze distant now. "I already feel the changes. There are nights when I don't recognize my reflection. There are days when I think in tongues no human has ever spoken." I felt nauseous imagining what he described, and there's no way to avoid it. "Not for me." His eyes returned to mine. "My fate is already sealed, but for the Valley there is still hope. That's why you are so important, Alina. With you, with the crystal, we can renegotiate the terms." "As my father tried to do," I observed. A shadow crossed his face. "Your father tried to break the pact completely. He didn't understand that the Valley depends on it, not just for protection against external invaders, but for its very existence. The Valley was forged by the original pact. If the pact is broken, the Valley will return to primordial chaos. And you believe we can renegotiate without breaking it? I believe, he said, with a conviction that was almost palpable. The united blood of the two lineages, mine and your mother's, has never been presented to the ancients in this way. It will be a new beginning, a new alliance. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but saw only hope mixed with resignation. Hope for the valley. Resignation for his own destiny. What if it doesn't work? I asked softly. Then the valley will perish, he replied simply, and you and I with it. The frankness of his answer shook me. There were no guarantees, no promises of success, just a possibility, a risk he was willing to take. There's something you're not telling me, I said, following my instinct. A slight smile touched his lips. Many things, niece. Some you will discover on your own. Others, it's best you never know. That doesn't make me more confident. Confidence, he repeated, as if savoring the word. A rare luxury in our family. Your father didn't trust me. I didn't trust him. And that brought us here. He reached out to touch my face, but stopped inches away, as if fearing the contact. I don't ask for your trust, Alina, only your participation. The rest will come. Or not. His words should have increased my doubts, but strangely, they had the opposite effect. There was a raw honesty in his admission that was more convincing than any eloquent promise. I'll finish the cloak today, I said, making my decision. And on the night of the ceremony, I will be by your side. Something gleamed in his eyes, relief, gratitude, or perhaps something more complex. Thank you, he said simply. And in those two words, I felt the weight of decades of loneliness, of a burden carried unaided for too long. I returned to my work with renewed determination. The cloak grew under my hands, the symbols now singing to me as I embroidered them, telling stories of bygone eras, of pacts made and broken, of power and sacrifice. I worked non-stop, ignoring hunger and fatigue, guided by a force that seemed to come not only from within me, but also from without, as if invisible hands guided mine, as if silent voices whispered instructions in my ears. When the last stone was sewn, when the last thread was tied, I sat back to contemplate what I had created. The cloak shimmered in the candlelight, each constellation pulsing with a life of its own, each symbol a window into a world beyond ours. It was the most beautiful and most terrible work I had ever made. Madame Hera came to retrieve it that night. Her eyes widened when she saw it complete. It's more powerful than any I've ever seen, she murmured, touching the fabric with trembling fingers. It will allow you both to walk deeper into the realm of the ancients than any Lord of the Valley has ever walked. That's what we want, isn't it? I asked. To go deep enough to renegotiate the pact. She looked at me with a complex expression. Fear, admiration, and something that seemed almost like pity. Be careful what you wish for, Alina, she said softly. The ancients don't think like us. For them, renegotiating can mean something very different from what you imagine. What should I do then? I asked, frustration growing. Everyone gives me warnings, but no one offers me alternatives. Because there are no easy alternatives, she replied. Only difficult choices, she hesitated, then added. If you decide not to participate, if you decide to flee, there are people who would help, who would hide you. The offer surprised me. You would help me betray the Lord of the Valley. I would help Marwen's daughter choose her own destiny, she corrected, as I promised your mother I would a long time ago. I looked at the shimmering cloak, feeling its power call to me. What about the valley? The innocent people who live here? Madame Hera didn't answer, and her silence was answer enough. There was no choice without sacrifice, without loss. I will take the cloak for the final preparations, she said finally. The ceremony will begin at sunset tomorrow. Until then, she hesitated. Until then, listen to your heart, Alina. Not the blood in your veins, nor the ancestral voices in your mind, just your heart. After her departure, I spent restless hours in my room, alternating between periods of intense agitation and moments of strange, almost supernatural calm. The crystal pulsed against my skin, hotter and brighter as the hour of the ceremony approached. On the afternoon of the next day, staff came to fetch me. I was bathed in water scented with herbs, my hair washed and combed until it gleamed like polished copper. Ceremonial robes were brought. Not elaborate like those of noble ladies, but simple and elegant, in a deep shade of green that made my eyes seem even more amber. And there were jewels too, a single silver bracelet for my left wrist, engraved with symbols similar to those on the cloak. "A gift from the Lord," explained the staff member who placed it on my arm. "It belonged to your mother." I touched the bracelet with reverence, feeling a physical connection to the woman I had never known, who had died to protect me. When the preparations were finished and I was alone again, a knock at the door surprised me. I opened it to find not a member of the staff or a guard, but Thorn himself. He was dressed in simple yet elegantly cut black ceremonial clothes, with only a thin silver line on the collar and cuffs. The cloak, my cloak, was folded over his arm, shimmering even in the dim light of the corridor. "Are you ready?" he asked simply. I hesitated only for a second before nodding. "I am." "There's something I need to show you before the ceremony," he said. "Something you need to fully understand before we do this." I followed him through the palace corridors, noticing how staff and guards lowered their eyes as we passed, some making discreet gestures of protection. Their fear was palpable, and I realized it wasn't just respect for the Lord of the Valley's authority. It was a deeper, more primordial fear, as if they sensed what he was becoming. To my surprise, he led me downwards, not upwards, descending spiral stairs that plunged into the depths of the mountain beneath the palace. The air grew, colder and damper as we descended, and the torches on the walls cast shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Finally, we reached a wide corridor that ended in a large double door of black metal. There were no guards here, only silence and the distant sound of running water. "The sacred caverns," Thorn explained. "The place where the original pact was sealed. No human beyond the Lords of the Valley and chosen Lunas may enter here, except on the night of the ceremony." He touched the door with his palm, and the black metal shimmered momentarily, responding to his touch. The doors opened silently inward. What I saw beyond them took my breath away. An enormous cavern opened before us, so vast that its ceiling was lost in the darkness above. But it wasn't dark. The entire cavern was illuminated by crystals that grew from the walls and ceiling, similar to the one I carried, but larger, some the size of a man. They pulsed with their own light, creating a spectacle of impossible colors that danced on the stone walls. In the center of the cavern was a perfectly circular lake, its water so clear and still it seemed like glass, and in the middle of the lake, an island of black stone, where a simple altar of the same material stood. "The heartstone of the mountain," Thorn murmured beside me. "The center of the pact." We advanced to the edge of the lake. The water was so transparent that I could see the bottom, covered not with sand or stones, but with bones. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of small, delicate bones. "What are these bones?" I asked, a shiver running down my spine. "The price," he replied simply. "Each renewal demands sacrifice." Horror grew within me. "Human sacrifice?" "Not anymore," he said quickly, noticing my fear. "In the early days, yes, but for generations the sacrifice has been symbolic. Blood freely offered, not lives taken." I looked at him, searching for signs of deceit, but his eyes were clear and direct. "Then what are these bones?" "The remains of the first sacrifices," he explained, "and of creatures the ancients deemed worthy of being offered. Time doesn't pass here as it does in the world above. What you see could be thousands of years old, or just a few decades." I looked again at the lake of clear waters and white bones, feeling its ancient power call to me. The crystal against my chest pulsed in response as if it recognized its home. "Why did you bring me here now?" I asked. "Why not wait until the ceremony?" "Because I want you to fully understand what we will do," he replied, his eyes intense. "There will be no turning back once the ceremony begins. I wanted to give you one last chance to see, to know, and to choose." "Choose what?" "To participate or not," he gestured to the door behind us. "You can still leave the valley. You can still escape your destiny, as your father tried to do." I was surprised by his offer. "I thought you needed me to renegotiate the pact." "I do," he admitted. "More than you can imagine, but I will not force you." His face softened in a way I had never seen before. "You are my brother's daughter, Alina, the last of our blood. I will not sacrifice you as he was sacrificed, even for the good of the valley." Those words, more than anything else he had said or done until then, convinced me of his sincerity. It was not the Lord of the Valley speaking now, but Thorn, the man, the uncle, the last of my living family. I looked at the altar on the stone island, at the pulsating crystals on the cavern walls, at the lake of clear waters and white bones. All of this was part of me, of my blood, of my history. To flee would be to deny not only my destiny, but my very identity. "I'll stay," I said finally. "I'll participate in the ceremony." Something gleamed in Thorn's eyes, relief, gratitude, and perhaps a hint of sadness. "Thank you," he said simply. As we turned to leave the cavern, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a series of paintings on the walls, partially hidden by the shadows. I approached to examine them and realized they told a story, the history of the Pact, of the valley, of the lineage of the Lords and Lunas. One image in particular caught my attention, that of a man and a woman standing side by side before the altar, while shadowy figures watched them from the cavern's depths. The man strikingly resembled Thorn, but younger, without the scar. And the woman had my eyes. "Your parents," Thorn confirmed, noting my interest. "At the last ceremony they participated in together, before Aaron decided the pact should be broken." "What changed?" I asked. "Why did he decide that?" Thorn hesitated before answering. "Your mother was pregnant with you. When he discovered what the pact would demand of his daughter, he decided it was too high a price." He touched the painting gently, tracing his brother's face. "He wanted to protect you as any father would." "And what would the pact demand of me?" I asked, a knot forming in my throat. Thorn didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and grave, the same it demands of all of us: service, sacrifice, solitude. There was more in those words than he was willing to reveal. I could sense it. But before I could press for more answers, he turned toward the exit. "Let's go. There are final preparations to be made, and the sun will soon set." I followed him out of the cavern, feeling the weight of generations of history and sacrifice on my shoulders. Whatever destiny awaited me that night, I would face it not just as Alina, daughter of Aaron and Marwen, but as an heir to two ancient lineages, bearer of a legacy I could no longer deny. When we returned to the surface, the sun was already beginning to set, casting a golden-red glow over the palace towers. Staff hurried through the corridors, lighting torches and candles, preparing for the most important night of the year. "Go to your quarters and rest a little," Thorn said. "A guard will come for you when it's time." I nodded and watched as he walked away. The shimmering cloak folded over his arm, catching the light of the setting sun and transforming it into impossible colors. In my room, I tried to rest as he suggested, but the restlessness would not allow it. I stood at the window watching the sun slowly descend behind the distant mountains, feeling the crystal pulse ever stronger against my chest as darkness approached. When the knock finally sounded at my door, it was not a guard, but Madame Hera who awaited me in the corridor. "Come," she said, her face tense. "It's almost time." As she led me through the corridors now lit only by torches, she spoke in a low, rapid voice. "Remember what I said, Alina. Follow your heart, not just your blood. And know that whatever happens tonight, you are not alone." She squeezed my hand briefly. "There are those of us who served your mother, who swore to protect her, and who now swear to protect you." "What does that mean?" I asked, confused by her enigmatic words. "It means there will be a choice to be made tonight," she replied. "And when the moment comes, you will know." Before I could question further, we arrived at a large hall I had never seen before. Dozens of people were gathered there, nobles, councillors, representatives of the great families of the valley, all dressed in their finest clothes, all with solemn and slightly fearful expressions. Thorn stood in the centre of the hall, now wearing the cloak I had created. Under the torchlight, the embroidered symbols seemed to move, as if they had a life of their own, and the tiny precious stones marking the constellations shone like real stars. When I entered, a murmur ran through the crowd. I heard fragments of whispers. The orphan, eyes like hers, the lost daughter. I kept my head high, ignoring the stares, focusing only on the imposing figure of my uncle. "Alina!" he called, extending his hand. I walked to him, conscious of every pair of eyes that followed me, of the silence that fell over the hall as I approached the Lord of the Valley. When I took his outstretched hand, I felt a current of energy pass between us, and the crystal against my chest shone so brightly that its light was visible through the fabric of my clothes. "People of the Valley," Thorn's voice resonated through the hall. "Tonight, as on every night of the Ceremony of Lights for hundreds of years, we will renew the pact that protects our lands and our people. But tonight is different." He squeezed my hand. "Tonight, the blood of the two lineages is united again. Tonight, I present to you Alina, daughter of Aaron and Marwen, rightful heir of the Lunas and of the blood of the Lords of the Valley." The murmur that followed was like the distant roar of an approaching storm. Some people knelt spontaneously, others recoiled, making gestures of protection. I saw fear in the faces of many, but also hope in some, especially the elderly, who seemed to recognize the deeper meaning of what was happening. "Together," Thorn continued, "we will walk to the heart of the mountain. Together we will speak with the ancients, and together we will ensure the prosperity of the valley for another generation." What he didn't say, what everyone knew but no one dared mention, was that this would be his 7th renewal, the last before the final transformation. Holding my hand firmly, Thorn led me out of the hall, followed by a small group of elders and councillors who carried torches. The rest of those present remained in the palace, where they would spend the night in vigil, awaiting our return or not. We descended again into the depths of the mountain, this time by a different path, a wide staircase, clearly intended for ceremonial occasions. The torches cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the air grew increasingly dense and charged as we descended. Finally, we reached the same cavern Thorn had shown me hours earlier, but now, in the torchlight and under the cover of night, it seemed different, older, wilder, more alive. The crystals on the walls pulsed with a more intense, almost frantic rhythm, and the water of the central lake seemed to stir slightly. Although there was no wind, the councillors and elders remained at the cavern entrance, keeping a respectful distance. Only Thorn and I advanced to the lake's edge. "Now," he said softly, just to me, "you must take out the crystal and hold it in your hand." With slightly trembling fingers, I pulled the silver cord from beneath my clothes and removed the small crystal from the pouch. The moment I touched it directly, it shone with a dazzling intensity, projecting impossible colors that danced across the lake's surface. "The fragment recognizes its home," Thorn murmured. "Now we need to cross the lake to the altar." I looked at the crystal-clear water, remembering the bones at its bottom. "How? There's no bridge or boat." A slight smile touched his lips. "We don't need them. Blood will open the way for us." He extended his free hand and, with a swift motion, cut his palm with a small dagger he had pulled from the folds of his robes. Dark blood welled from the cut, and he let it drip into the lake water. Where the drops touched the surface, something extraordinary happened. The water moved, parted, creating a dry path directly to the central island. "Your blood is also necessary," he said, offering me the dagger. I hesitated only for a second before accepting the blade and making a small cut in my own palm. The pain was sharp but brief, and when I let my blood fall into the water, the path widened and solidified, becoming a bridge of dark red crystal that connected the shore to the island. "Come," Thorn said, gently pulling me by the hand I still held. We walked together over the bridge of crystallized blood, feeling it firm under our feet despite its fragile appearance. When we reached the island, I came face to face with the black stone altar, a simple block, unadorned but with a cavity in its center, perfectly sized for the crystal I carried. "It is here," Thorn said, his voice strangely reverent, "that we meet the ancients. It is here that the pact is renewed." "What should I do?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "Place the crystal on the altar," he instructed. "When you do, they will come." I looked at the small, shimmering fragment in my hand, feeling its power pulse in sync with my heart. It was part of me now, had been my whole life, even without my knowing. To surrender, it seemed to surrender a part of my own soul, but I had come too far to retreat. Taking a deep breath, I reached out and placed the crystal in the altar's cavity. The instant the fragment touched the black stone, the entire cavern trembled. The crystals on the walls glowed with blinding intensity, and the lake began to churn violently, its surface rippling as if something enormous moved beneath it. And then they came, from the deepest shadows of the cavern, from cracks in the rock, from the very waters of the lake. Figures began to materialize. They were neither entirely solid nor entirely ethereal, but something between the two states, like shadows that had gained density and form. They were the ancients, tall, slender creatures with limbs too long to be human, slightly elongated heads and eyes, pupilless eyes glowing with the same impossible light as the crystals on the walls. They gathered around the island, dozens of them, silent and watchful. Fear froze me in place, but Thorn remained calm beside me, as if he were already accustomed to their terrible presence. "We have come to renew the pact," he said, his voice clear and firm in the supernatural silence. "I, Thorn, seventh of his name, Lord of the Valley, and Alina, daughter of Aaron and Marwyn, heir of the two lineages." One of the ancients advanced, taller than the others, with a crown of crystals growing directly from its forehead. When it spoke, it was not with a voice I could hear with my ears, but as thoughts directly in my mind. "The fragment has returned," the creature said. "After so long, the circle is complete." "Yes," Thorn responded, "and with it the possibility of a new beginning." "New?" The creature tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Or ancient, what was will always be. What will be always was." Thorn took a step forward. "I propose new terms for the pact. The valley will remain protected, the barrier between worlds intact. But the price?" He hesitated. "The price must be renegotiated." A silent murmur ran through the ancients. Like a wave of collective thought, I could feel pressing against my mind. "The price is the price," the crowned creature replied. 7 renewals, 7 transformations, afterwards complete union. This was the bargain. An unjust bargain, Thorn argued, made in desperation when the valley was young and vulnerable. Now we bring the united blood of the two lineages. We offer power greater than any previous pact could provide. And what do you ask in return? The creature came closer, its inhuman face inches from Thorn's. "Freedom! Immortality without transformation. Power without price. Only balance," Thorn responded. "That the Lord of the Valley may serve as guardian between the worlds without being consumed. That the lineage may continue, strong but human." The ancients stirred, communicating in a language of subtle movements and shared thoughts that I could not fully comprehend. Finally, the crowned creature spoke again. "The original pact was sealed with pure blood from both sides. If you wish to renegotiate, the same price must be paid." "We are ready," Thorn said, extending his cut hand. "Not your life," the creature corrected. "Your humanity. And hers." I froze, horror growing within me as I understood the meaning of those words. They didn't just want our blood. They wanted to transform us, as Thorn was being transformed after his 7 renewals. "No," Thorn said, his voice suddenly harsh. "That was not the agreement I came to propose." "It is the only possible agreement," the creature replied. "The valley exists on the threshold between worlds. Its guardians must do the same." Thorn turned to me, his intense blue eyes full of conflict. "This was not what I planned, Alina. I wanted to free you from this destiny, not condemn you to it." But before I could respond, the crowned creature moved with supernatural speed, its shadowy form enveloping Thorn like living mist. "You have already made your choice. 7th of his name," it said, the mental voice now laden with ancient power. 7 times you have come to us. 7 times you offered your blood and your humanity. The process has already begun. It cannot be reversed." As it spoke, something terrible began to happen. The cloak Thorn wore, the cloak I had created, began to merge with his skin, the embroidered symbols becoming living marks that spread across his face and hands. He fell to his knees, a cry of agony escaping his lips as the transformation accelerated. "Stop," I cried, stepping forward. "You're hurting him." The creature turned to me, its pupilless eyes fixed on mine. "There is no pain in transformation, only revelation. He becomes what he was always destined to be." I watched in horror as Thorn's skin began to change, becoming paler, almost translucent, the veins beneath it darkening until they looked like lines of black ink. His eyes, already supernaturally blue, began to glow with the same impossible light as the crystals around. "Alina," he called, his voice now strangely distorted, as if several voices spoke at once. "The crystal. Take the crystal and run." I looked at the altar, where the fragment I had carried my whole life shone with blinding intensity, slowly merging with the black stone. If I let it complete this process, the pact would be renewed, and both Thorn and I would be transformed, lost to humanity forever. It was then that Madame Hera's words echoed in my mind. "There will be a choice to be made tonight, and when the moment comes, you will know." In a desperate impulse, I lunged for the altar and grabbed the crystal. Intense pain shot through my arm as my fingers closed around it, as if I was trying to tear a part of myself away. But I did not recoil. With all the strength I could muster, I pulled the fragment away from the stone. A sound like the tearing of the very fabric of reality echoed through the cavern. The ancients recoiled, their shadowy bodies undulating in agitation. The crowned creature emitted a mental scream that made my ears bleed. "Stop! The pact must be renewed or all will perish." "Not this way," I replied, holding the crystal firmly despite the pain. "Not at the cost of our souls." I looked at Thorn, still kneeling, partially transformed, his face a mask of agony and determination. "Go," he whispered. "Save yourself, Alina." But I couldn't simply abandon him, neither him nor the valley that I now knew was my true home. There was another solution. I could feel it. The crystal in my hand pulsed with possibilities, with untrodden paths, with choices yet unmade. "There is another way," I said, addressing both Thorn and the ancients. "A true balance, not dominance, not submission, but partnership." I knelt beside Thorn, taking his partially transformed hand in mine. With my other hand, I raised the crystal between us. "This fragment belongs to both worlds," I continued, the words coming from somewhere deep within me. "Like me, like all of us in the valley. Neither entirely of this world, nor entirely of the other. The original pact recognized this, but over time, the balance was lost." The creatures watched, agitated but attentive. The crowned one approached again, its pupilless eyes studying the crystal in my hand. "What do you propose, daughter of the two lineages?" it asked, its mental voice now more controlled. "A renewal of the original pact, not as it was distorted through the centuries, but as it was truly conceived. Protection in exchange for respect, power in exchange for wisdom. The barrier maintained, but not as a prison, as a bridge." As I spoke, the crystal in my hand began to change, expanding. Fragments of light breaking off and floating around us like tiny living stars. "The valley will remain as neutral territory where our worlds can meet in peace. The Lord of the Valley will continue as guardian, but not as a sacrifice." And I hesitated, knowing that what I was about to propose would change my life forever. I will be the Luna, the mediator between worlds, neither entirely human nor entirely transformed, a living bridge. The light fragments from the crystal now circled faster, creating a brilliant dome around Thorn and me. I felt power grow within me, a power different from anything I had ever experienced. Not the coercive power of the ancients or the protective power of the lords of the valley, but something new. Power of healing, of transformation, of creation. The crowned creature extended a shadowy hand, touching the barrier of light. "Interesting," it murmured in my mind. "The crystal responds to you in a way we have never seen before, not even with the first Luna." "Because she carries both bloods," Thorn said, his voice clearer now, the transformation process seemingly halted by the crystal's power. "She is what the original pact always intended to create, a being of perfect balance." The creature pulled back, conferring silently with the others. As we waited, I looked at Thorn. The black marks that had begun to spread across his skin were slowly receding, but not disappearing completely. He would never be entirely human again. He had gone too far for that. But perhaps he didn't need to become entirely other. Finally, the crowned creature returned. "Your offer is unprecedented," it said. "The pact always demanded complete transformation after 7 renewals. But the crystal..." It gestured to the light fragments that still surrounded us. "The crystal suggests new possibilities." "So you accept?" I asked, barely daring to breathe. "With conditions," the creature replied. "The valley will remain under our influence, though not under our direct control. The current lord of the valley will remain partially transformed, neither entirely human nor entirely ancient. And you," its eyes fixed on mine, "you will become the Luna, bound to the crystal and the valley for your entire life. You can never leave these lands. You can never relinquish your role. A lifetime of service, of isolation, of responsibility. It was a high price. But looking at Thorn, at what he had sacrificed over the years to protect the valley, to protect me, even without knowing, it didn't seem so terrible. I accept," I said firmly. "And I too," Thorn added. Squeezing my hand, the creature nodded, a strangely human gesture for such an alien being. "Then it is done." It extended its hands, and the other creatures imitated it, forming a circle around the island. As one entity, they began to chant, not with audible voices, but with thoughts that vibrated in the very air, in the water, in the stone around us. The crystal in my hand pulsed one last time, then exploded into thousands of tiny fragments that floated around us like stardust. I felt each fragment merge with my skin, my hair, my eyes, not painful but strange, as if parts of me that had always been dormant finally awoke. Beside me, Thorn underwent a similar but different transformation. The black marks on his skin did not disappear but stabilized, forming patterns that resembled the symbols I had embroidered on the cloak. His eyes retained that supernatural blue glow, but the humanity in them did not fade. When the process finished, I felt different, lighter and heavier at the same time, as if I was more firmly anchored to the earth and yet more connected to something beyond it. "It is done," the crowned creature said. "The pact is renewed, transformed. You are the Luna now, Alina, the first in generations to bear the title in its full meaning." I rose slowly, helping Thorn to do the same. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Is the valley safe?" I asked. "The valley is in balance," the creature corrected. "Safety is an illusion. Balance is the only lasting truth." With those enigmatic words, the ancients began to withdraw, fading into the shadows of the cavern, submerging into the lake water, disappearing into the rock crevices. In a few moments, only the crowned creature remained. "We will meet again, Luna," it said, its mental voice now almost gentle. "In the spaces between worlds, in dreams, in visions. You are our voice among humans now, as your uncle was for so long." And then it too was gone, leaving Thorn and me alone on the island. "Did you know this would happen?" I asked softly, watching the last shining particles of the crystal merge with my skin. "No," he answered honestly. "I hope to renegotiate the terms to save myself and protect you from any future involvement. I spoke the truth when I said I wanted to free you from this destiny. But I chose to embrace it," I completed. He nodded, a tired but genuine smile touching his lips. "As your mother would have done, as my brother would have approved despite his fears." I looked at the black stone altar, now empty. The small crystal I had carried my whole life was now a part of me, its energy flowing through my body, connecting me to the valley in a way I was only beginning to comprehend. "And now?" I asked. Thorn looked at the bridge of crystallized blood that still connected the island to the shore, where the counselors and elders waited anxiously, their torches small points of light in the cavern's darkness. "Now," he said, "we begin again, together." We crossed the bridge hand in hand, uncle and niece, lord of the valley and Luna, neither entirely human nor entirely other, guardians of the fragile balance between two worlds, protectors of a land that existed in the space between realities. When we reached the shore, The elders knelt, not in submission, but in recognition. I could see in their eyes that they perceived the change in us. The subtle luminescence of my skin, the elegant marks that now permanently adorned Thorn's face and hands. "The pact has been renewed," he announced, his voice echoing in the cavern. "But transformed. A new era begins for the valley." We returned to the palace under the starry night sky, each constellation now seeming familiar to me, like old friends whose names I had just recalled. The people awaited us in the great hall, tense and fearful. When we entered together, a murmur ran through the crowd. Some recoiled instinctively at seeing our transformation, but others, including Madame Hera, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears, approached, recognizing that something extraordinary had happened. "The valley is safe," I announced, my voice clearer and more resonant than it had ever been. "The pact has been renewed and transformed. No longer will it demand total sacrifice, but balance and respect." Thorn took a step forward. "I present to you Alina, daughter of Aaron and Marwen, my niece by blood, and now Luna by right and choice." He turned to me, inclining his head in an unprecedented gesture of respect. The first true Luna in generations. A stunned silence fell over the hall, soon followed by a wave of bows and murmurs of awe. Madame Hera was the first to approach, taking my hands in hers, her eyes studying the subtle but undeniable changes in my appearance. "You chose," she said softly. "And you chose well." "I hope so," I replied, conscious of the weight of the responsibility I had taken on. In the days and weeks that followed, I learned what it meant to be Luna. It wasn't just a title or position. It was a way of existing, of perceiving the world. I could feel the pulse of the valley beneath my feet, the breath of the mountains, the whisper of the ancients in the deep caverns. When I touched a sick child, my fingers glowed softly, and the illness receded. When I walked through the fields, the plants leaned toward me, as if recognizing something familiar in me. Thorn, still Lord of the Valley, but now in a different way, taught me what he knew about our lineage, about the pact, about the mysteries of the valley. And I, in turn, shared with him the new insights I received through my unique connection with the crystal now fused to my being. Together we began to transform the valley, not overnight but slowly, gradually, like water shaping stone. The ancient barriers that separated humans and ancients were softened. The knowledge that was once monopolized by the lords of the valley was shared more widely. And I, the orphan who once feared being noticed, became a symbol of change and hope. Madame Eleanor, L'Arael, returned to the palace at my invitation, bringing with her the children from the servants' hall. Her surprise at seeing my transformation soon gave way to a kind of resigned pride. "I always knew you'd find your way back," she said, touching my face gently. "I just hoped you could have a normal life before that." "Normal was never my destiny," I replied, smiling, and I'm at peace with that now. On a quiet afternoon, months after the ceremony, I found Thorn in his private studio, adding new details to the ancient mural. The marks on his skin had stabilized, neither advancing nor receding. A visible reminder of the balance we had achieved. "What do you think my parents would say?" I asked, watching him paint. "If they could see us now?" He paused, considering the question. "Aaron would be worried but proud," he finally replied. "He always wanted to protect you from the Luna's destiny, but he also always respected choice and sacrifice. As for Marwen," he smiled, a smile full of memories. "She would laugh in that way of hers, as if she had known all along this would happen." I approached the mural, studying the figures Thorn had added. A woman and a man standing side by the altar in the cavern, surrounded by crystalline light. Us. "I'm not finished yet," he explained, noticing my interest. "There's more story to be told, more symbols to be discovered, more destiny to be written," I completed. He nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. The valley was safe, for now. The balance was maintained, for now. But nothing is permanent, not even pacts made with ancient creatures. There would be new challenges, new negotiations, new choices, and I would be there to face them. No longer the frightened orphan from the servants' hall, but as Alina, the Luna of the valley, guardian of the balance between worlds, weaver of destinies in a cloak of infinite possibilities. Because in the end, I discovered that true magic was not in the crystal, nor in the pact, nor even in the blood that ran in my veins. It was in the choice, in the courage to embrace who I truly was, with all the responsibilities and sacrifices that it brought. And in that choice, I found not only my destiny, but my freedom.